We are back for chapter 2 of George Weigel's Letters to a Young Catholic. We wanted to talk today about the Scavi and St. Peter's role in our church and how he is not only our first leader, but he is also someone that we look to and we realize that he is not perfect, and Jesus chose him for the fact that his imperfections will teach all of us that we can always change. And that's going to be an important part of our faith. That's going to be an important part of discovering that a life with Christ is about conversion, is about changing things, is about always seeking holiness in everything that we do. So that's going to be an important lesson for all of us today. So if you look at your Weigel review sheet, which is chapter 2, we see the question, describe how St. Peter's Basilica, both of the basilicas, came to be built. Now we trace the first basilica back to Constantine, and he was aware of the place where Peter is buried, and he will want to honor this saint and mark the place where he died. Now remember, Peter is going to die in Nero's Circus, which is adjacent to the Vatican Hill, and Nero's Circus is the place of many Christian persecutions, and where Nero will use the Christians as a scapegoat, and Peter will be killed at the circus. And we believe that the last thing that he's going to see will be the obelisk, will be this monument that was taken from Egypt and brought all the way back to now Rome. And what we will do, the Catholic Church will do, is it will be brought from Nero's Circus to the center of St. Peter's Basilica. So that is going to be an important monument for us, because we want to look at this obelisk as not only something that was tied to Peter, but also we want to see it as something to show that our faith of 2,000 years far outlasts the Roman Empire, far outlasts the Egyptian Empire, and now is going to take this new role. Our faith is going to take this new role as this eternal church. So that's going to be important for all of us to see. Now Constantine is going to build this. The church is going to last for many, many years, and it will be in the 15th century that the popes are going to decide to rebuild St. Peter's, which is falling into disrepair, and they are going to enlist the greatest artists of all time, like Michelangelo, Bramante, Bernini. All of these different artists are going to be brought together, and they are going to work on the new St. Peter's. Now, for nearly 2,000 years, we had believed that St. Peter was buried underneath the altar, and it will not be until the death of Pius XI that we are going to see the excavations take place. You know, one of the things that's going to be very, very important for us is to look and to see what happens with the excavations, which are going to be ordered by Pius XII after the death of Pius XI. They are going to start the excavations, and they're going to discover the Tropion, which is going to be this ancient monument, which we believe is going to be like the center place, a place of burial for St. Peter, which will serve as the first altar of this church, and where behind it we will find the body of St. Peter. The Tropion is significant because as you look at the Tropion, on the right-hand side, on the red brick wall, we are going to find the graffiti or the carving that says, "Peter is here." This is important because the early Christians are going to mark the place where the first pope is going to be buried. This is going to be important because for all this time, we were never sure where Peter was. We were never sure if we actually knew the place where the first pope was buried. Now, behind Jesus and then Mary, Peter really is the most prominent person in our church. He is going to be the one who is going to lead the early church. He is going to do everything from making sure the Gentiles are included in the church. He is going to make sure that the church is led in the proper way. But as we saw in chapter 2, we're dealing with a man who has imperfections, a man who is never really sure about what Jesus wants, because I don't believe he listens. I believe he's consumed with his own will, which is a will that says, I want to live, and I'm willing to protect my life at all costs. If we look at the situations, and you want to make sure that you understand the different situations of St. Peter, where he lets Jesus down. One very, very important one is where he says that Jesus does not have to die. Jesus calls him Satan and says, stand behind me, Satan. Get behind me, Satan. No one should stand in the way of the will of God. That is going to be a significant moment. We're going to see that when Jesus invites him to walk on water, he steps out of the boat, and he is walking on water while he's focused on Jesus. He's walking towards him. And then all of a sudden, as he starts to be distracted, he starts looking around, looking for other things to keep him afloat. He starts to sink, and all of a sudden, he realizes his need for Jesus Christ. Obviously, the denial is going to be the turning point for Peter. It's when he hits bottom. He denies our Lord 3 times. It's going to be this time where he leaves his best friend. His best friend has been arrested. He tells everyone that asks, I do not know the man. As if your best friend is walking beside you, and when you're confronted, you just deny that you even know them. It's a traumatic moment for Peter. Peter breaks down. Peter goes into hiding. And it will not be until after the resurrection, when he is confronted by Jesus, when he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And we want to also be conscious of the way the word love is used. And we have our own translation. If we look at the Greek, we have to be sure that the first time Jesus basically asks him, do you care for me? And Peter says, well, sure, I love you as a friend. The next time Peter is asked, would you die for me? And again, he answers him kind of in the same way. And Jesus realizes where Simon is at. He's at still this raw stage where he really hasn't developed yet. He has not realized where he is going to have to give up his life. So what happens? He says, basically, Peter, do you love me? Meaning, at this time, would you just be my friend? Would you love me as a friend? And Peter says, of course, Lord, I would love you as a friend. So 3 times to counter the denial, he is going to basically, again, not really give Jesus any assurance. For us, we look at our own relationship with Jesus, and we certainly have our own hesitations at times, even though we should know him, even though we should give him everything that we have. Why are we so hesitant to do what we are supposed to do when it comes to Jesus Christ? It becomes a great problem for us to even get to Mass. It becomes a problem for us to pray. Why are we so hesitant to give him everything that he has given us? He gives us the cross. He gives us his love. He gives us his sacrifice, but yet we say, Jesus, I love you, but like Peter, with conditions. We kind of hold back and we don't really give him what he really should get from us. So that's going to be important to realize. Peter is not perfect. It will not be until we get to the Via Appia, until we see Peter as he's leaving, as he's running out of Rome. Nero is killing the Christians and he's scapegoating the Christians. It will not be until that moment where he meets Jesus that he is going to say, Lord, where are you going? And Jesus makes it very clear that I'm going back to Rome to be crucified. And it's at that moment Peter's conversion finally reaches its completion, and he says, I must turn around and I must go into Rome. We know how the story ends. He is crucified, we believe, upside down, which is going to be significant because in the Scavi we're going to find a body that has no feet in the place where we believe that the head apostle was found. So this is going to be important because we know the tradition that comes with this. We know that for 2,000 years we said we believe that Peter is here. But yet I think very often we look and say, well, I don't know. I want to question that. I know that's what the tradition tells us, but I'm not sure if I want to believe this. So if you look at what is the tropion and what is the scavi and how are they important to us? The tropion is important because it's going to mark the place where we find the first pope. The scavi is important because we put our hands into the dirt. We get down literally to the nitty-gritty of our faith. We are going to discover the truth of our faith. Many times people question these stories that occur in the Bible, and they question the stories that are associated with the saints and the faith, and they look at it as it's some kind of fantastic myth. The story of Peter is going to be real. It's going to be literally as earthy as the dirt in the scavi. We're going to find the first pope. We know that he was not perfect, but yet we see a man who is willing to change for Jesus Christ. The question we want to ask ourselves is, how willing are we to change for him as well? That's going to be a very, very important question for us. So we want to keep that in mind. How willing are we to change? The Quo Vadis story is a story in which we have someone who had their conditions. Every relationship that we enter into, we want to enter into usually on our own terms. We usually tell people what we want out of the relationship. We demand certain things. We look for certain things. We end up to be in these relationships of utility. I use you, you use me. And very often these relationships fall apart very quickly because, as you might have read last year in Why Am I Afraid to Tell You Who I Am, they end up being, subject-object relationships, sometimes even object-object. We treat each other as if we're objects. We use each other, and we don't get very much out of this relationship. So what happens? It falls apart. I think very often when Peter was in this relationship with Jesus, he was very much wrapped up in the moment. He wanted to give him everything he had, but yet he was hesitant at times. He really couldn't give Jesus everything that Jesus really expected from him. That's going to be something that we want to make sure that we can turn around and we can say, what am I willing to give to Christ? What am I willing to give him? And hopefully that's everything that we have. What can the current church learn from the faults of St. Peter? Well, very often we see in the news that they're consumed with these scandals. And they look and they believe, well, the church should be held to this high esteem and this high standard, and they don't understand that every time that you inject humanity into anything, it messes it up. And although the percentage of any kind of scandal in the church is minute, unfortunately, people make that the norm. People want that to be the norm, even though it's not. When we look at Peter, we realize that we can always change. The church can always change. The humans in the church can always change to make it better, to make their lives better, to seek holiness, to try to find a world in which we are doing what we're supposed to do. As we look at the story of Peter, eventually he gets it. Eventually he will turn fully back to Jesus Christ. When we look at the scavi, we want to see that he's real. And as Weigel says at the end of the chapter, failure is not the final word. Love is. When we look at the relationship that we have with Jesus Christ, he permeates everything he touches with love. And that's about the sacrifice that he was willing to make for us. Now, are we willing to make that sacrifice for others? So we want to look at this story and realize that conversion is always possible. Our lives are constant conversion. If you're not asking yourself, how can I change to make myself better? You're not doing what you should be doing. That's something we have to ask ourselves. How do I pray? I know I could always pray better. Can I get to church as often as then I can always get there more. Do I love the people around me? Do I make sacrifices for them? Do I do enough for them? Do I treat my parents with the respect that they deserve? My brothers and sisters? Can my friends count on me? Am I a responsible student? Am I a responsible son or daughter? These are going to be things that we want to constantly evaluate. Now, we always want to take a look, just shifting gears a little bit. We want to make sure, as Catholics, we understand where we fall in liturgically. And we've been going over quite often this liturgical year. I just want to go through this one more time, because some people still are having difficulty kind of putting the whole year in perspective. We have to remember, as you look at the liturgical year, all things begin and end with Christ. So therefore, we must prepare for him. So we begin with the season of Advent. Advent will be 4 weeks, and during Advent, we always celebrate the Feast of the Immaculate Conception. That is December 8th. We move these 4 weeks and we make our way to Christmas. Christmas, we celebrate the birth of the Savior of the world. It will be during the Christmas season that we celebrate the Feast of the Three Kings, the Epiphany, around January 6th. And we're going to, and also there's a Solemnity of Mary, which will take place on January 1st. And then we will conclude the Christmas season with the Feast of the Baptism of Jesus. And then we will go for a short period into ordinary time. During this month or so in which we're in ordinary time, we make our way to Ash Wednesday, which will begin the season of Lent. From Lent, we're going to go these 40 days, and it will be during that time in which we usually celebrate the Feast of the Annunciation, March 25th, and we're also going to make our way to the most holy week of the year, Holy Week, which will begin on Palm Sunday. Lent will end with the Easter Triduum, which begins on Holy Thursday evening, and it will go through the 3 days until Easter Sunday. Easter Sunday begins the glorious feast of Easter, and we will celebrate this season, and we will carry that season all the way through the 50 days of Pentecost. During this time, we will also celebrate the Ascension, Jesus ascending into heaven, 40 days after Easter. 50 days after Easter will be Pentecost. The Feast of Pentecost will conclude the season of Easter. Then we will return to a long period of ordinary time, which will take us through the rest of the spring, into the summer, into the fall, all the way until the Feast of Christ the King, which will be in later November. The Feast of Christ the King will conclude the liturgical year, and then from there we will then again return to Advent. So just a quick look at the liturgical year. We will touch upon other feasts which are going to be important, but we want to make sure that we understand the importance of the liturgical year and to see how the life of Christ should be woven into our life as well. So that will conclude today's little review, and if you need to access it, it is also on my website. Thanks so much.